Hey community, how we doing everyone? Carter here, lead researcher at Shape Protocol. Um, Back in 2021, I did a lot of updates where I just hop on and start recording and just kind of talk about where my headspace is at, just kind of giving you, the community, kind of updates on where we are and where we're going. Um, and one specific I want to talk about today is value accrual, specifically the MetaEngine. In the bottom of the bear market, we launched ShadeSwap, we launched Silk, and it became clear to us that we needed to kind of kickstart the mechanism that proved that shade stakers were valuable, and that if you're a token holder, as someone who's securing the protocol, that there was going to be value at the end of the day given to those folks. And so we kind of, we had this original MetaEngine blog post that talked about the protocol owned liquidity flywheel, but the fees and volume on the platform were so small that by kind of like splitting up our efforts into building out that flywheel, it just didn't make sense. It didn't create an excitement and a conviction that was needed in a scenario where like Shade Protocol was in a pretty shaky place from like a market capitalization and from a traction standpoint. And so we kicked off the MetaEngine by having 100% of all fees on the platform go back to stakers. And we've now done this for, let's see here, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So like we'll call it 6-7 months. And in that time, we hit the 50,000 shade mark, 50,000 shade given to shade stakers. And if you think about that in terms of active circulating supply, roughly like 1% to 2% of active circulating supply has been essentially like purchased and redistributed. The beauty of the system, of course, is like there's no inflation, there's no additional tokens being printed. This is fees being, from the DEX, from interest fees, from Silk, all like converting tokens back to Shade and like creating that kind of price floor and that valuable floor. And like we're on track to do somewhere between $1 million to $1.5 million in fees going back to Shade stakers. But like when you think about growth and you think about Shade Protocol's biggest problems, this type of strategy doesn't quite make a lot of sense now that we're starting to see some traction. Emissions on ShadeSwap are still a very large piece of the puzzle, right? The Silk Shade pool receives 50% of all emissions. It's a lot of shade on a daily basis. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of shade here being, distributed to liquidity providers. And kind of the whole original vision of the MetaEngine is liquidity providers are essentially like an inventory cost. They're like you have to have the inventory in order for people to go into your shoe store and buy the shoes. You have to have inventory, right? And liquidity is no different. The thing is like owned liquidity. If you're thinking on like a 10-year scale, the sooner we can get away from renting liquidity, the better off we're going to be, right? It's like, why rent a house that you're going to then rent out to someone else if you can buy the house and then rent it out to someone? And ultimately, it all has to do with your time horizon. And one of Shape Protocol's original visions was always to operate with the longest possible time frame. I've always believed that in a space that has no patience, patience is a superpower. We are now 2 years into our journey. And 2 years ago, we talked confidently about what it would mean to get 2 years into the journey. And so when I talk about what does it mean for Shape Protocol to exist for 5 years or for 10 years, these things are going to become a reality a lot quicker than what we can possibly conceptualize, because we're also locally time biased to right now, the urgency of right now in this moment. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I do think it's an appropriate time. We had 100% of fees go back to stakers within the context of a bear market, within a context of like a pre-governance world. But there is like an urgency here. Like when we're giving stakers, 15, 20% staking APY, when a lot of like for the sake of the stakers in the community, that value could be pushed back into protocol and liquidity that's going to generate more liquidity, more users that will ultimately, over the long-term horizon, provide a higher APY for Shade stakers. And so it's always controversial, right? Like, we made a really big move back in June and July with how we handled Shade swap fees and how they got redirected. That was 100% the correct play. I think most people can say when we turned on that fee switch where we took 100% of trading fees on pairs that are incentivized by Shade to go back to the Shade DAO. Like, that was a radical move, and it was the right one. And in a similar sense, I think we need to start building out protocol and liquidity. If we can drive our inventory expenses down as a collective community, then our profit margins on the whole protocol starts to go up. And it also starts kind of like building this ownership story. We've seen other protocols start to talk about protocol and liquidity. But if all you are is like protocol and liquidity and you're not like a product suite that's also generating utility from multiple perspectives, I think the strength of protocol and liquidity in that scenario becomes a lot less interesting, a lot less significant. And because Shade has things like the money market coming, like the liquidity order book coming, like vault management protocols, we have so many different building blocks across kind of the product suite. I think protocol liquidity is going to see way more utilization, and it's kicking off so many other flywheels within the system that it's like mission critical for us to prioritize protocol and liquidity. Just like 100% of value going back to stakers back in that June, July, August period was mission critical. Protocols have lifespans. There's different moments where you need to prioritize different things. There is a time and place to take risk in any given direction. The protocols that are static, they are the ones that die. And like, our philosophy has mirrored this. The design of Silk has mirrored this since day one. We said the only thing we can predict is that you can't predict the future, and therefore we need to design a stablecoin capable of reacting to the volatility of the 21st century. Silk is capable of evolving. And in a similar sense, like the Shade protocol community and our ethos around like the management of protocol value has to be dynamic. It has to be sensitive to the changing times. It's like, if we can have a community that embraces that experimentation and we don't become overly afraid of making big moves, that is what's going to separate us. And there's a time and place to ossify, right? There is a time and place to ossify things, but it's not when you're a $20 to $25 million market cap protocol. That's not when you ossify. You ossify when you have so many users that change scares them away. But right now, the changes we make are going to attract more people than we're going to lose. The people that are here have been with us for over 2 years, and we have a collective trust, a collective wisdom of the village. And I find myself falling prey to like analysis paralysis of like occasionally kind of freezing like deer in headlights. Like, are we sure we want to try something big? Are we sure we want to try something different? And I think the truth is, as long as we're capable of telling the story behind the changes we're making, why we're doing that, and as long as the changes we're making are rooted in a rationale that makes sense within the protocol's lifespan, then we gotta go for it. We gotta trust our gut on that. So that's why I would propose that we would add in a staking cap. I think that if we're always going to be doing these big buybacks of Shade, the fee conversion from collected fees, but I think an APY of over 7%, I think that crosses into the territory of essentially like not financial. It's not financially sound for us to be giving away that much value as opposed to investing in the future of the protocol. And there's no better way to invest in the future of the protocol by owning the inventory, the oil and the fuel of the entire MetaEngine that makes Shade Protocol special. It makes all of these integrated and interoperable products seamlessly work together. So I would advocate that we add in that staking cap, that the community kind of embraces and endorses that. And of course, like, we're open to feedback. Should it be 7%? Should it be 8%? Should it be 9%? Should it be 10%? Why 7% from my perspective. So I think if you look at a lot of the different staking APRs of mature protocols, like Cosmos Hub, I think is a great example. I think anything north of 10% is very aggressive, and I think anything south of 5% can be kind of depressing. And so I think something like 7% is a really good sweet spot of enough that it's high enough of an APR that you don't feel like you're earning enough yield, but it's a good yield, but it makes you want to acquire more of the protocol, to have a larger stake in the protocol, to like be able to tap into that percentage. So I think a 7% staking cap, and then I think out beyond that staking cap, what is the most valuable liquidity for Shade protocol to own? It's a great question. I think there's two different ways of looking at this. You can think about liquidity that's pointed inwards, and you can think about it as liquidity that's pointed outwards. The most important inward looking pool is the Silk Shade pool. All of the different trades that happen on ShadeSwap are largely routed through that pair. And so if you can think of it like a spigot or a hose, where we have like all this pent up pressure, and the best way to deal with that pressure and that desire from the market to trade more is to expand that center pool. And our options right now are like rent more liquidity, or to kind of go back to the shoe store analogy, like we're renting a space, but let's slowly start buying out and expanding the building while we're renting out a certain portion of it. We need to increase our capacity and our ability to support volume flowing through the Silkshade pool. The beauty of buying Silkshade liquidity as well is it ultimately is buy pressure on Shade. And when we're buying Silk represents an interest payment stream, right? Every Silk in circuit right now, the only interest rates are technically on USDC and USDT, but every Silk is technically tied to an interest payment stream. So on the Shade side, the protocol is securing its own future by converting fees and buying that asset. And then on the Silk side, we're kind of like acquiring stability and acquiring something that represents yield that ultimately goes back to the protocol. And we're improving like the most important part of how liquidity and trading is flowing. That's the Silk Shade pool. On the other side, besides acquiring and expanding that, I think is the perspective of like, what assets do we believe are blue chip assets? What protocols are competitors not investing in that we believe have a bright future? What tokens do we want to tie Shade's future to in a very significant way? And there's like this kind of interesting dynamic that I've kind of seen within these discussions where people are like so bullish on their own protocol that they're kind of like, why would I ever trade my equity or tie my equity, like, governance token, to someone else's future? And the answer ultimately is lots of protocols are in different part of their growth stages, and they're in different verticals. They have different purposes. You cannot be the best at everything, right? Shade Protocol's mission is very simple. We are the best private DeFi in all of Web3. Anyone who wants to compete with us on that can try their best. But we're not going to try to say we are the best liquid staking provider and the best decentralized exchange and the best stablecoin and the best lend. Like across the board, we're the best at everything. That's foolish. What we're best at is we're really, really good at all those things while being the only ones that have ever done that with privacy. And as more people come along that try to copy what we've done, we're the only ones that have the best user experience, a trusted brand, and the best security in the game tied to these things. Those are like the long-term moats, the long-term competitive advantages. And so within that, like, we have to acknowledge there are other protocols that are they're on the same upwards trajectory that we are, and they're really freaking good at what they do, and they have a future that is not going to disappear overnight. So I think like Bitcoin, for instance, we can all agree that is a blue chip asset that if the Shade DAO held 50 million in Bitcoin, that'd be pretty bullish if we can govern that collateral asset. That'd be pretty bullish if there was 50 million in Bitcoin tied to 50 million in Shade, because now we're tying our liquidity and the correlation to Bitcoin over time. Super, super bullish. Another really popular asset would be something like WST ETH, a yield-bearing version of Ethereum. The Ethereum layer 2 ecosystem is going to continue to thrive and prosper. And yes, there's lots of other layer ones out there that are going to compete with Ethereum, but is Ethereum realistically, in terms of lindiness, is Ethereum going anywhere? It's like, no, it's going to be here. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to see usage. That is another asset that I think Shade Protocol could align itself with. And then if we get away from those, major blue chip projects, what in Cosmos do we believe has a bright future? What are there projects here that we want to position our liquidity and our economic alignment with? And I have a couple of opinions on this. I think Atom has an extremely bright future. There was a period in there where people started to question kind of the moneyness of Atom, its role as interchain collateral. Will it have the ability to be dynamic enough to be an asset that continues to be extremely important? And what I really like about Atom is it's incredibly distributed. A lot of chains out there are better than the Cosmos Hub at like a specific use case. But what they all struggle with is a lot of them were very VC backed. A lot of them have not been around as long, and there's a lot of wealth concentration in those systems, and they all suffer from the kind of same problem that Ethereum has, is you can either be really good collateral or you can be a really good platform. And the problem is if you're trying to serve both bases at once, you bump into a problem. If I'm really good collateral, it means my gas fees are now more expensive, which means it's now a worse platform for people to build on and for people to use because it's so expensive to interact with the platform. Now, if I make myself a really good platform, it means I want really cheap gas fees, and it means that collateral is probably not as valuable as it should be if you're prioritizing its properties as interchain capital. And so Atom does not have that problem. It focuses on, it's essentially interchain capital that is governed, and it's interchain capital that is secure. And people can tap into the security of the Cosmos Hub with things like partial set security, with interchain security. And then outside of like providing security, all the Cosmos Hub has to do is spread Atom as the most liquid IBC native asset in the game. And I am very, very bullish on Atom's future. I think it's going to have an incredible story arc over the course of the next 5-10 years because of the nature of being native IBC money. I think another one is also like the liquid staking providers. If Cosmos is going to have another 10,000 blockchains in the next 10 years, there's going to be so many different assets that need to have a yield-bearing version of themselves. And I don't see, like, I think Stride, and I think Persistence and Quicksilver, all of these are incredible projects that are actually very undervalued. They're undervalued if you think about the collective Cosmos ecosystem story arc over the course of the next 10 years. So I think Shade should align itself with Atom. I think Shade should align itself with Stride and with things like Persistence and things like Quicksilver. And it means that it should be taking a bet on those things. It should be building and acquiring those assets to build liquidity with them. Because we don't just want to invest in our story arc. We want to invest in the other story arcs that are intertwined by proximity to kind of the native IBC-ness. And as well as by proximity of communities. We have this kind of beautiful cross-pollination of communities that's happening in Cosmos right now as we speak. The day and age of like single isolated tribes of capital and of mindshare and of people is going to start dissipating the more mature all of this technology becomes. So in summary, 7% staking cap. Reinvest all the other pieces of the puzzle into building out protocol-owned liquidity paired with the Shade token, tied to Bitcoin, tied to WST ETH, tied to things like Stride, tied to things like Persistence, and tied to things like Atom. And I think specifically Atom, because the Atom wars are coming, and I think 2024, 2025 is going to be a huge, huge year there. So we should take an asymmetric bet there. I think Shade Protocol and the community will massively benefit by being one of the first protocols to take an outsized asymmetric bet, not on itself, but on someone else in Cosmos. So anyways, thank you all for your time. I know I haven't done one of these in a while. I feel a little rusty. I got to kick off a bit of the rust. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, any thoughts, if you disagree with any of the philosophy or thoughts behind this. I'll be posting this on the Shade Protocol forums, and hopefully I can continue to kind of re-engage in this one-on-one format with yourself on the other side and myself here, and we can continue to push the envelope of what's possible in the world of Web3, and specifically in the world of Shade, where we believe it's all about your money, your data, your decisions. Plenty of room in the shade. Have a good one, guys.